Okay, Samach Tes, Amud Aleph, 69A1. Let's go back to the words of Atanya, because the truth is I think we stopped in the middle. So first of all, let's begin with the question. A very practical question. You're sitting at your Shabbos table, and you have a nice bottle of wine, and the bottle of wine is not mivushal, okay? It says not mivushal, it doesn't say mivushal on it. And you have at your table someone who does not keep Shabbos. And they go ahead and they borrow this bottle of wine. Like, oh, borrow this bottle of wine. They open the wine, start pouring this wine. Is that wine? Can you drink that wine? Can you drink that wine? Question. Okay, we'll see.
Just because he's not religious?
Just because he's not religious. So there is halacha in general that a person who is, that for many halachos that we have restrictions around a non-Jew doing something and therefore causing something to whatever the status. So in many respects, someone who is not religious is also in that same status, in the same category. For a number of halachos, when it comes to, for a number of halachos, bishul akum, for example, is something that we not only do we have the restriction for a non-Jew, we typically have the restriction for someone who is not religious as well. So what would be the halacha? How do we treat someone in this regard when it comes to, so whether it's bishul akum, whether it's the wine, Bishul akum is cooking by a non-Jew. So, meaning there's certain things which have to be cooked by a Jew, and something, without getting into all the details now, but typically your typical meal, it would have to be cooked by a Jew. There are certain, things if a non-Jew, if a Jew turns on the oven, the non-Jew can continue, but that's the general thing. And so there are distinctions made not only between a Jew and a non-Jew, but also a Jew who does not fully keep Shabbos. So today's discussion, first we have to get through one piece, but then that comes back to our Gemara that we discussed earlier, but then we're going to get into a broader discussion about how do we define someone who does not keep the mitzvos? Like, what are the categories? And we're going to start the discussion, we're going to finish it, but we'll finish the Gemara as part of it tomorrow. Yeah.
I don't know that I want to sock halacha because...
so don't ask. Just kidding. Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody who is not showing Shabbos but says they keep kosher.
Good. So that we're going to talk about tomorrow. Okay, see you tomorrow. Now, Tanya, let's go. So we're at 69A1. It's 69A1. So 69A1, Vatanya. Let's go back to Vatanya, the Brisa. So this was actually supporting, Abaya made a distinction between when a person goes ahead and does bittul, right? They go ahead and they relinquish their rights to the courtyard. And then then he was making a distinction. So let's say party number one does bittul. So we're specifically talking about asadasi, we're talking about tzeduki, and he goes ahead and does bittul. He says, I relinquish my rights. But then the Gemara Rabbi wants to distinguish between two scenarios. One scenario is when then he goes ahead and uses the courtyard before anyone else does, right? And the other is if he uses it after the other people do. And Abai said, if he's the first one to use it, then he's retracted his relinquishing. If someone else the other people of the courtyard used it first, then we've acquired he gave it to us, so then we've acquired it. He can't go back. He doesn't have the ability to go back and take it after we've used it first. That's the distinction Abai made, right? And the Brisa is going to support this, but the Brisa talks about two separate things. Vatanya, and then we're going to start again on the bottom, 69A1, the bottom of the first column. Vatanya was taught in a Brisa. Ad shelo nasar reshuso hotzi. If he carried out into the mavoi before he gave his rights up. Okay, so now we're talking about a scenario we're talking about a scenario where it's Shabbos, and Reuven over here forgot to wasn't part of the Eruv, right? So now we want to go to Reuven, so we say to ourselves, listen, we're going to go to Reuven. We realize this on again. Let's just give the proper scenario. It's Shabbos. Shabbos began. Reuven was away, and Reuven shows up on Shabbos morning. Now, Reuven shows up on Shabbos morning, and so all the neighbors say, oh no, what are we going to do? We want to use things. We go, look, let's go to Reuven after davening and ask Reuven if he could relinquish his rights to us. If he relinquishes his rights to us, then we could have the place. The problem is after Shachris we'll go to him. Now during Shachris, they see him carrying his tefillin bag, his talis bag, or whatever, or carrying some stuff outside. Wait a second, no one's allowed to carry over here. There's no Eruv, right? There's no Eruv. So says the Gemara. So the Brisa says like this. Ad shelo nasan reshuso hotzi. If he carried out into the mavoi before he gave up his rights, whether he did it by mistake, he carried his talis by mistake, okay, mistake. But even if he did it deliberately, even if he said, yeah, I know there's no Eruv, I don't care about Eruv, right? And he carries it on purpose, he's still allowed to do bittul. That's the Pinur Rameir. Rameir says that even if a person deliberately carries when there's no Eruv, which is what Reuven just did, we're still able to go to Reuven after davening and say, Reuven, could you please relinquish your rights? Even though we just saw that he is, being Mechal Shabbos b'mezid, he's desecrating Shabbos on purpose, nonetheless he could relinquish his rights. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, B'shogeg yachol levatel, if he took out his talis bag by mistake, okay, fine, he made a mistake, no problem. But b'mezid in yachal vatal, if he does it on purpose, then he can't do bittul. Why? Because if he did it on purpose, then he's mechal Shabbos, then he's desecrating Shabbos. Says, okay, I'm going to shul, but I'm carrying. I don't care about Shabbos. Whatever, I'm carrying. I don't care about the lack of eruv. Then he doesn't have the ability to relinquish his rights. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, now let's keep on reading. The Bryce is not done. Mishanas reshusa v'hotzi. Okay, if a person relinquishes his rights and then he carries out bein b'shogim mezid, whether he carries out into the mavoi unintentionally or deliberately, okay, oser, it restricts the Eruv, right? So if Reuven goes ahead, now a new scenario. Reuven went ahead and relinquished his rights, and then he carries outside by mistake or on purpose. His relinquishing is retracted. Divrei Ameir, those are the words of Ameir. Omer ben Mezid, only if he carried out on purpose, then it retracts his relinquishing. B'shogig and oser, but if he did it by mistake, it doesn't. Okay, and then the Brisa finishes. B'medvar murim. When did Rameir say his words? B'shalo hechzik b'nei mavoi b'mavoi hechzik. When the members of the mavoi did not first use the mavoi. If the people of the mavoi first use the mavoi, then even if the guy then goes ahead and carries, even on purpose, it doesn't matter. And that's exactly what Abaye wanted to say earlier. Abaye said, the way to reconcile the Mishnah Brisa was that in a scenario where the opinion of Rameir is to say that in a scenario where the individual Reuven went ahead and he used the mavoi before anyone else did, then he just retracted his relinquishing. It doesn't work. But if they used it first, then they've just acquired. What does relinquishing mean? Relinquishing means I'm giving up my rights to you. So if they used it, then the Reuven goes ahead and uses it again after. He can't take his things back. Doesn't work. And therefore, it would be a good relinquishing even if he used it after the other people in the courtyard used it. Got it? That's the distinction. Again, if they used it first, that means they've acquired the relinquishing. If he used it first, then he's retracted it. That's the distinction being made. Okay, but in the course of the Brisa, we also mentioned this idea of a person who keeps Shabbos, doesn't keep Shabbos. That's the discussion we're now going to get into. So, Amar Mar. First we okay. Amar Mar. First have to analyze one part of the Brisa. It was said above in the Brisa. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'lashon acheres. Rabbi Yehuda said the story regarding Gamliel in a slightly different way. Okay, remember Gamliel was in a courtyard with a tzedukah, and what happened was that they got the tzedukah to relinquish. And then Rabbi Gamliel said something to the people of his courtyard. Rameir had one version. Rabbi Yehuda, this is the version of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, "Ma'aru v'asu tzarchechem b'mavoi." Quickly do your needs in the mavoi. Ad shlo techshich v'yeser alechem. Okay, before it becomes dark, and he restricts you from carrying. Right. So what do we see from here? According to Rabbi Yehuda, could a tzedukah relinquish his rights? No, because what is he telling the people? He's saying, okay, you got him to relinquish your rights, shkayach, doesn't matter. Go ahead and do whatever you need to do before Shabbos begins, because when Shabbos begins, you can't use that courtyard. Alma nachrihu. Clearly from Rabbi Yehuda, we treat a tzedukah like a non-Jew. Ask the Gemara, but there's a contradiction. Vanan achlo yotzi tnan. But in the Mishnah, we had Rabbi Yehuda saying a different version. We have Rabbi Yehuda saying before the tzedukah carries things out. So what does that tell you? That tells you that he holds it is a good relinquishing. It's just that if he uses it first, then he retracts the relinquishing. But if he doesn't use it first, it's a good relinquishing. So which one is it? Does Rabbi Yehuda hold that it's, again, a tzedukah is a Jewish person who rejects the oral law, right? So in one version, he's saying he's not a Jew in this regard, and therefore his relinquishing doesn't work. Remember, a non-Jew cannot relinquish his rights. A non-Jew, we have to do what? We have to rent. We have to do schiros, right? So on the one version, in one place, we see him treating the tzedukah, this irreligious, non-religious Jew, as a non-Jew, and saying that his relinquishing doesn't work. At the same time, we have him in another place saying that it works. We just have to beat him to the courtyard because if he goes first, it's retracted. But if we beat him to it, it's a good retraction. So the Gemara gives possible answers. Ema, maybe we should say Achelo Yotzi Hayom. It doesn't mean until the tzedukah goes ahead and takes things out. Okay, the words were Ad Shelo Yotzi, until he doesn't bring anything out. Don't read it that way. Rather, Ad Shelo Yotzi Hayom, until the day doesn't go out. In other words, do it, which is a Talmudic way of saying until Friday is over. In other words, he wasn't talking about the tzedukah bringing things out. He was saying until the sun goes away, the sun goes out, right? The sun leaves. In other words, do it before Shabbos begins. Okay, and therefore there's no contradiction. Really, Rabbi Yehuda would consistently hold that a tzeduki is considered like a non-Jew, and therefore what he's saying is that his relinquishing doesn't work, and therefore he's saying do whatever you need to do until before Friday turns into Shabbos. Fine. That's Vibay Sema. Alternatively, Lo Kasha, no contradiction. Kan b'mumar lechal Shabbosos b'tzina. Here we're talking about a Jew, a person who is irreligious, who desecrates Shabbos privately. And here we're dealing with a person who desecrates Shabbos publicly. Okay, so here we start seeing already a distinction the Gemara was trying to lay out, and that is that there is now, until now we've assumed there is someone who's irreligious, and that's it. But now we're being taught, and we'll see there's a couple of different variations of this, which will eventually get to your question, but not today, and that is that let's say you have someone who is not, you have people, right? It's not like you are keep mitzvos or you don't keep mitzvos. There are oftentimes people somewhere in the middle, right? So here now we're talking about Shabbos, and we're saying there's someone who doesn't keep Shabbos, but sometimes they'll do it publicly, and sometimes they'll do it and sometimes the person who will never do it publicly, they'll only do it privately. Okay? And so the Gemara wants to say that if it's a person who doesn't keep Shabbos publicly, his relinquishing doesn't work. We treat him in this respect like a non-Jew. But when it comes to someone who doesn't keep Shabbos, but only, behind closed doors, will take out his phone, whatever it is, that's a different story. And therefore, even if we all know it, but it's done privately, then that is considered, then that person could relinquish his rights. Okay? Let's keep on reading because we're going to have an even more interesting definition of what sinna means. So ask the Gemara, now that we've established that, the Gemara asks as follows, who does the following brisa go like? Mumar v'giloi panim harezeh and mevatel rishus. A mumar, which means an irreligious person, and a brash person. Okay, they do not relinquish rights. Ask the Gemara, giloi panim mumar have? Is a brash person in the same category as an irreligious person? It's not good to be brash. Not good to be like whatever, arrogant and all that. But okay. It's bad midos, but we don't treat that person halachically like an irreligious person. What are you talking about? So the Gemara says no. Elamumar big giloi panim. Someone who brashly is irreligious. They're very brash about their about their irreligiousness. Yeah. That person can't relinquish rights. Right? So someone who is very bold about their about their non-keeping Shabbos. Come on, who does this go like? So again, if you remember, I know it was a few minutes ago, but it's a lot of information. Rameir was the one who said that the tzeduki, if he goes ahead and carries into the courtyard, whether it was done, Rameir said, if a person goes ahead and carries, the first part of the brisa said, if Eruvin carries in the courtyard by mistake or on purpose, he could still relinquish rights. So Rameir clearly holds that someone who is Mechal Shabbos could relinquish rights, right? Rabbi Yehuda was the one who said that if he does it on purpose, he can't relinquish rights. And then we just saw a distinction within Rabbi Yehuda. It depends. If it's done in public, then he can't relinquish rights. If it's done privately, he could relinquish rights. So now go back to the question. Who is the one who says that someone who brashly desecrates Shabbos cannot relinquish rights? Who is that? Okay, it's Rabbi Yehuda. It's Rabbi Yehuda because Rameir is the one who said, that's what you're going to say, right? Of course. Rameir is the one who said that a person who goes ahead and carries on Shabbos, even if it does it on purpose, it's not a problem. Yes?
What about, we're talking about a brash individual, but someone doesn't keep Shabbos because they don't know anything. It's just like a...
excellent question. So the Beis Yosef who quotes this halacha and then says, but let me introduce you to a concept called a tinok shenishba, right? And he's writing this at a time not too long after the Inquisition, etc., where there is so many confused people, people who are brought up in different settings. Okay, so in this respect, again, it's a super complicated. All these we don't have the time to get into all these lachos. In this respect, the poskim say that would be tzina. In other words, in this particular respect of Eruv, I'm not talking about other things, but a person who never knew, doesn't know better, they were brought up in whatever setting it was, then that we call a tinok shenishba, literally a child who was captive. We don't mean literally they were captive, but historically, that was the case, meaning all the Jews knew, because they all lived together, all knew what Shabbos was. Who was a Jew who didn't know? A Jew who was taken captive by a non-Jew. So therefore we call any Jew who was not given a proper education, the term we give is tinok shenishba, a child who was taken captive in the sense that they have the same education. Fine. So in this respect, we treat them the same. Other places, not the same, not so much, not so simple. K'mad Rabbi Yehuda. So again, that brisa says a brash individual doesn't keep Shabbos. That's like Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara. And here's a fascinating Gemara. Hahu denafak bechumarta demadosha. A person who went out publicly wearing a bag of spices, carrying on Shabbos, right? If you remember Masech Shabbos, can't wear a bag of spices, etc., etc. Fine. Kevan dechazil Rabbi Yehuda nesia kasye. As soon as he saw Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, what did he do? He said, "Hi, Rabbi Yehuda, how you doing? I'm just scratching my back." weirdly, right? What he was doing, he was they used to carry the spices over here because it would cover their bad breath. So he would, yeah, it's the original Listerine. Okay, so what's it called? So basically he would go like this because he was embarrassed, right? So says, Amar, he said, Kigon zeh, Rabbi Yehuda said like this, Mevatel Rishus Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda would say, this person can relinquish their rights. This is the definition of tzina. Tzina does not mean they're only using their phone behind closed doors. Tzina means that what? They're afraid of someone. And even if the only person they're afraid of is the chief rabbi, right? That's still tzina, right? Now, it has huge ramifications in halacha. Okay, so let's come back to it. I'm going to come back to it, right? But this is a while. No. Today, God willing. I just want to make sure we get through the rest of the Gemara. But this would be right. So when we talk about someone Michal Shabbos b'fra Hesia or b'Bitzina, so right that includes most people. Most people would say, like, if they would see the chief rabbi of Israel walking down the street, they probably wouldn't like get in their car at that moment. They'd probably like just put it behind their back and say hi. Yeah, I don't know. Like, oh look, there are people on the show who will drive to Shon Shabbos, but they're not going to get in the car in front of me, right? They're not going to certainly chief rabbi, it's not going to happen, right? There is someone who will stop them. Someone who will stop, not because they're stopping them. They're not going to do it. They're not like drive down the block over here, the windows down, blasting some music. They're going to park, whatever. They're going to have a little bit of, I'm not going to do it in front of everyone. Even though they might do it in front of their friends who Shomer Shabbos, right? Again, over here we're saying, in front of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, they stopped. In front of Rabbi Yehuda the peddler, they wouldn't stop, right? That's still called sinner. Let's come back to that. Rav Huna is Yisrael Mumar, who is a irreligious Jew. Zemechal Shabbos for Hesia, that is anyone who publicly desecrates Shabbos. Okay, now Rav Huna is saying the statement in general. The Gemara is going to try to figure out. The Gemara at this point assumes he's making a very general statement. Okay, that an irreligious Jew is someone who desecrates Shabbos publicly. Amar Nachman, come on, who is that going like? Ikra Meir Damar Chash L'Davar Echad Chash L'Chalatzar Kula Afil Be'Echad L'Chalatzar Shabbatar Nami. So Rameir elsewhere says that when it comes to someone, and this starts to touch on Jesse's question, if someone is suspect in one area of Torah, right? You go to someone's house and you say, "Can I eat the food?" Right? And you see that they don't have mezuzahs up, right? So they're not good in one area. Rameir says we can't trust them in any other area. Right? If we know that they don't have credibility in one area of halacha, I can't give them credibility in other areas of halacha. I have to assume, right? Someone asked me this past week. They were at someone's house and they were opening the fridge and the fridge lights were on. All right, and so I said, wait, if they're not careful about turning off their lights on the fridge, can I trust their kashrus? Until now, I assumed they knew what they were doing regarding kashrus, but now I see that they're leaving lights on, which are going to be on and off on Shabbos. Now, again, obviously, there's the rare scenario where a person forgot it. We all forgot to turn the lights off on Shabbos. We're talking a scenario where the person's going in and out and whatever. We could assume it wasn't done by mistake. Whatever. They're just not careful about turning off. Not careful. They don't care about turning off their lights on Shabbos or whatever. So, or they don't know. Even if they don't know, the point is they're not knowledgeable in one area. I'm not going to be able to take any questions right now, so hold on. What's it called? But so do we say therefore we're not going to trust them in other areas, right? So if it's Rameir says if you're suspicious about one area, we're suspicious about other areas. Ikra Banan with the rabbis, what do they say? They disagree. They say no. If we don't trust you for Shabbos, we still do trust you for kosher, presumably, right? They said whatever area you're showing you're not good at. Right? If I see a kashrus, all of a sudden I see all these foods in your house, that are not good for, that don't have hechsherim, right? So I say, okay, so I'm not going to eat the kosher, but in terms of Shabbos, I can rely on them for Shabbos, right? So Rameir says one area, all areas. Rabban say, no, whichever area, stick to that area. So unless Ad 69b1, Ad have a mumar level unless the person's a heretic for idol worship. Idol worship is like so bad. If a person's not care about idol worship, we're like, all right, forget it. Okay, so the Gemara asks, who is this person? So in other words, which time is Rav Huna going like when he says that a person who doesn't keep Shabbos is like someone who is a completely irreligious Jew in all respects? So Rav Nachman Yitzchak Liti Rishus Levada Rishus. Rav Nachman Yitzchak says we're not talking about. Rav Huna wasn't making a general statement. He was making a statement regarding bittul Rishus, a very limited thing. V'chletanya, and as it says in the Brayso, Yisrael Murmur Shabbos Shabbos B'Shabbat B'Shuk. Let's say you have a irreligious Jew who observes Shabbos in public, a mevatz rishus, okay, then he's allowed to relinquish rights. She'ein m'shabbos Shabbos b'shuk. If he doesn't keep Shabbos in public, ein mevatz rishus, he can't relinquish rights. Because the Chazal said that a Jew is allowed to receive rights or cede rights, uvenachri etchiasker, but a non-Jew or someone who is like a non-Jew has to rent it out. Okay, then the Gemara just concludes. Kate said, how do you relinquish rights? Omerlo, right? We've been talking about relinquishing rights. How does it work? What's the formula? Omerlo rishusi knuya lach. I say my property is acquired to you. or my rights are relinquished to you. That's enough. You don't have to go ahead and make a formal transaction. You don't have to do like a kinyan sutter, a pen picking up, or shaking hands. All I have to say is my reshut. Reuven has to say my reshut is acquired to you, and that works. Okay, so we're not finished this whole discussion. I'm just going to talk about wine, just limited to wine, and there's endless questions and endless discussion we can have. But just regarding wine, this question of tzina. So it's interesting. Many poskim, even though the Gemara over here and many early poskim say that this is the definition of somebody's mechal Shabbos regarding wine, right? That a person who, if they would be embarrassed of desecrating Shabbos in front of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, then we consider that murmur that's only Michal Shabbos Betzina, that's called private, even though they're driving up and down Reisterstown or whatever, Green Spring, whatever it is. But if they would see the rabbi, whatever, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, they cover their heads, they do the whole take the yarmulke off thing that the kids in high school do, whatever it is, they would hide. They would hide that. So early poskim say, yeah, you could that would be someone who, regarding, let's say, wine that's not mevushal, they could touch that wine, no problem. However, many of the later poskim say, no. With Shabbos, and we're going to see a little bit more of that tomorrow, any desecration of Shabbos, we're going to treat that person, and part of it might be sociological, that this was a way of enforcing people to keep Shabbos and to create, there was some, legislation or decrees, we'll say, that were instituted at a later point to try to enforce Shmir Shabbos, especially, at a time when there was such a wave of people moving away from Shabbos observance, and many, Ramosha and others said, no, at the end of the day, even if it would be done privately, that person is treated like a mummer, that person is treated like they're irreligious across the board, and therefore you would not be able to touch their wine. So, practically speaking, what do? I'll just share the psak of Rav Yosef Tzvi Ramon. He says that really, ideally, we try to go with that view. We try to go with the view that anyone who doesn't keep Shabbos, we're not going to touch the wine. However, in a situation where it might be embarrassing to someone, let's say it's a family member or it's going to cause embarrassment, you could rely on the view that if there's someone who would be embarrassed in front of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, then there is what's relied upon to say, okay, they touched the wine, but you could rely on it certainly, for a family member. But anytime it's going to cause any embarrassment, there is what's relied upon. If you could avoid it, you should avoid it.
What about like just taking food